The Federal and Chettinadu Public School jointly present Run for Health Karegudi Marathon 2025 on March 2. This event is co-presented by Global Mission Hospital and Research Institute, powered by Repco Home Finance, associate sponsor Sethu Bhaskara College.
Education levels were low, poverty is much higher, has been much higher in the Muslim community. Food inflation has been so high that people can't afford to educate their children, but they can't afford to feed their children. There is still the patriarchal traditional India, where women have to practice the patriarchal norms expected of them. The burden is entirely on women of not only producing children, but contraceptives or family planning, the burden of childcare. If women work more or have better jobs, participate in the economy, only then will India become Viksit Bharat.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we take a multi-dimension view of a very important issue. Now, I'll begin with something which all of you know, that the Bharatiya Janata Party and Mr. Narendra Modi have been in power and the Prime Minister for the last 10 years plus. Now, in the course of this journey and right from the beginning, from the time that the BJP was a very marginal party, they have constantly used one issue as a campaign point, that the minorities of this country, especially the Muslims, have a higher population growth rate. Even during the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, Mr. Modi said that the Congress party, the opposition, would take away the wealth of the voters and give it to those who have more children. This has been a recurring theme right for the last 4 decades, ever since the Hindu nationalist movement gathered pace with the Ram Janmabhoomi or the Ayodhya dispute. Since then, we have constantly seen prejudice being hyped up, hatred being generated towards the Muslims and other minority groups, that they produce more children than the Hindus. I would like to discuss this because it's not just a political issue, but through this we want to get into the entire issue of demography and population of the country. We have to keep in mind that we became the most populous nation last year again, and so a very pivotal period we are passing through. Now, who do I turn to when we want to talk about population issues? I could find no one better than Poonam Muttreja, who is the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India. Welcome to the show, Poonam.
Thank you.
Besides Poonam, you being the Population Foundation of India, you have a long track record. You were the India Country Director of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. You've also led and co-founded the Ashoka Foundation, Dastakar, the Society for Rural, Urban and Tribal Initiative, and of course, how can I forget the Nagrik Ekta Manch, formed after the riots of 1984. I really do not know whether it's appropriate to call it riots or not. It was more of a kind of a pogrom against the Sikhs after Indira Gandhi was assassinated. Now, that is somewhere, sometime when we actually met, because as a young aspiring journalist, that is when I got introduced to you. You were one of the co-founders of that organization, which incidentally plays a very important part in the 1984 conflict of India. Let me begin by what I said. Fear-mongering, that Muslims are going to become more than us. Let us try to understand this, from you, that this has been going on for several decades. How, as somebody who understands demography and population issues, will you explain that? What exactly is the truth on the matter of Muslims overtaking the Hindus someday?
So it is true that Muslim growth rate used to be higher than it is today. And the reason it was higher was because education levels were low, poverty is much higher, has been much higher in the Muslim community. If you look at the Hindu growth rate in, for instance, in Kerala. In Kerala, Hindus and Muslims, the fertility has declined for both because there's higher levels of education for both, and income levels are better and comparative. But if you look at Bihar, the Hindu growth rate in Bihar is much higher than the Hindu growth rate in not just Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, where education and governance and healthcare and family planning services have been therefore better. So it is what, and India has very rich demographic data to show that it is poverty and low levels of income, illiteracy, etc., that leads to higher growth rates. But in spite of demographic data, the political view has been as though we didn't have the data. It is plucked from the air, as a professor of mine used to say when we used to question, how did this analysis come? So it is a political issue, but I want to say one thing, not only because for years there are certain religious forces who have pushed this viewpoint, but an average Indian today believes that Muslim growth rates are higher, much higher than Hindu growth rates, which is absolutely not true. Let me tell you what the growth rate is. It is today, it is not today, in the last census, it was 2.3 for Muslims and close to 1.9 for Hindus. And the next census, which, as you know, has got delayed, you will see the highest decline in the Muslim growth rate, which we have seen in the last two census. And why is Muslim growth rate declining? There are two reasons. One is Muslim women and families are also getting exposed, educated. Thanks to the media, the other half knows how the better half lives, and they know that the better half economically is having fewer children. Aspirations of a Muslim girl or a Muslim family are the same as that of Christians, Hindus, and others. Right. Second factor that has come in the last 10 years is that the income of people has not, especially the poor, has not increased. Yes. In fact, the jobs, even those people who have jobs, are not decent jobs, meaning the incomes are low. And second, the food inflation has been so high that people can't afford to educate their children, but they can't afford to feed their children. So people, even the poorer section, the less educated section, fertility is beginning to decline. As I said, it's partly aspiration, partly exposure, and partly the fact that, as I said, it's not a religious issue how many children people have. It depends on education of the girl, their incomes, and the ability to cope with the decline in the increase in food inflation. In India, especially the poor, they spend close to 80 to 90% of their earnings on food. And look at food inflation. So there is a big trend of declining fertility. And amongst the Muslims, the fertility rate, if you look at the next census when it comes, it is going to be a surprise for everybody. I won't be surprised if it's same as Hindu growth rate. It's been 13, 14 years since we've done a census. So
I interrupt you here at this point. I will talk to you about the census, which you feel has got delayed, but I have a slightly contrarian viewpoint. I feel that this government and this party is simply not really interested in numbers, because you can actually pin down people with numbers. The politics of the current government and the ruling party essentially goes without numbers, so that big stories can be woven about it. Anyway, I'll talk to you later about that. There's something very elementary which I wanted to ask. This was that the common understanding through the 80s, 90s, and even the first decade of the 21st century, as a journalist, we would often hear this viewpoint that the poor people have a higher birth rate because they look at children essentially as helping hands who can go out and actually make an earning. This is something which used to be said and believed by a large number of better well-off people, that these poor people, they breed like, just like animals. They have no control over them. They do not take to contraception. They do not take to any, want to listen to it. Now, as a person, who has actually dealt with this very complex issue of demography, how will you just explain that? Was this in any way true?
I would like to say partly true. Partly true because the poor had less access to health and still continue to have disproportionate access to good health. So when their children won't survive, and if they lose one or two children because they don't have health care or because of poor nutrition, undernourished children, undernourished women have undernourished children. So there was an inclination for survival of the child to have more children. So at least if two die, two will survive, average. So
Child mortality rates would have been very high then compared to now.
So mortality rates are going down, right? Child mortality rates. Therefore, people have greater confidence that their children will survive. Second, in terms of incomes, it was true when there were, well, even now there are less jobs, but there's opportunities and migration. Because as the South declines, even in Maharashtra, South India, people are migrating from Bihar and UP. So once migration happens, fertility rates go down. Second, when we educate our girls, fertility rates go down. So it was not just, it was half true, but there were other factors like education and incomes and child survival.
Right. Now, there's something, I started talking about, how the Hindu nationalistic parties have been using demography as a political point. There was one startling statement which was made just, in December last year by Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, who is the chief of the RSS, which is the ideological fountainhead of the BJP. Now, he said that it is time for all Indian families to have 3 children. He did not specify whether this was to ensure that Hindus do not get into a minority, the Muslims become a majority, but it was broadly said. Now, we also know that India has become the most populous country in the world, but we are also aware, courtesy reading articles by you, listening to people like you and other issues, that the growth rate, or what is also called the total fertility rate of India, is declining. So the number of Indians at some point should start declining. It should not be such an alarming situation that we'll have too many hands to feed, as is the popular misconception. So can you explain, take us through this roadmap of the Indian demography, how much it is going to expand till when, and when does it really start coming down?
Okay, so according to the UN projections, India will reach 1.7 billion in 2060s. Okay? 60.
60.
Yeah, around that period. And then it will begin to decline.
Okay.
And the decline will be much faster in 2100.
Okay.
The curve will come down faster as per the projections.
Okay.
So India's fertility has declined slowly and steadily, with the result that actually it's to our benefit. Why do I say it's to our benefit? It's because we have time to plan for an aging society. China, with its one-child policy, had a sudden decline, with the result that the dependency ratio has become extreme. So like India has 10% of our population, which is an aged population. But in another 15 years, we are going to have a population that's 20% aging. Now they are in trouble because they have an aging population and they don't have a young population that's decreasing very rapidly. So in our case, we have a young population. We have 360 million people, young people, many of them who are at reproductive age, and they will continue to have one or two children.
Okay.
Largely, the wanted fertility in India average for all religious communities for the entire country is 1.8, which means people barely want two children. And there are many young girls who aspire to marry late and have the choice, have a reproductive choice when they have children, how many children. Again, that's aspirational women, not just aspirational India. The young girls are very aspirational, and there's a lot of research that shows. Now, China, one of the reasons we've become the most populous country is because of the fast decline in Chinese population. If they hadn't put in a one-child norm, which they are regretting, they made it now two-child norm, then now they're asking people to have 3 children. But fertility trends always go in one direction.
It takes time. It takes time also.
And fertility will not begin to increase because Chinese government or China wants more children. They're starting even sperm banks. They're giving incentives to women, but women are not machines you can switch on and off. And so anyone who has such aspirations should not, going in the wrong direction. But going back to China, I think India has much to learn from what not to do and what to do. And India, as I said, has the richest demographic data. So I don't understand why our our politicians don't use the data, and why our citizens, perhaps we don't understand it fully. Perhaps we need to do a lot more. And I'm glad people like you, when you do such programs, it's very important to explain to people in our country, because there are more myths, misconceptions around population issues than there are truthful analysis or perceptions. I have not seen a situation much worse than the situation with their demographic data being misused, not analyzed properly when there is access that the government has to data. And by the way, the data that we are talking about, on the basis of which we do our analysis, is all government data. It's not data by some NGO, some human rights group, or some think tank. It is census, it is NFHS, National Family Health Survey, which is again government data. So, and India is a data-rich country, but we are misused. In fact, we lie about the data.
We also possibly misinterpret the data with political purpose. That is something which has been done. I just want to go back to the previous issue that we were talking about, this entire bit about the Muslim population. I was reading one of your articles and also heard one of your talks recently, where you talked very clearly that the entire thing about the Muslims overtaking the Hindu population is absolutely, just based on, just false projections. And you gave a figure that 18% of the total Indian population is the maximum that the Muslims would attain, and that too in the next century. Can you just explain this? Because this is a very important point, one of the political foundations on which today's ruling party has actually come to power.
Right. So, I'm going by the trends which have been analyzed by demographers, both in India and internationally, and our own analysis shows that even if Muslims have 3 children, given that they are only 14% of our population, they cannot forget overtaking Hindus. They can never go beyond even 18% is if their fertility does not decrease dramatically, which it is decreasing. And as I said, trends go in one direction. Once fertility declines, you cannot reverse it. And it's not happened in any state in India or any country in the world, including Europe, Korea, Japan, Russia, they're all struggling with reversing population trends. So nor will India be able to do it.
Right.
Second reason I believe Muslim population cannot overtake the Hindu population is primarily because Muslim girls are also getting educated. And if you see among education levels amongst Muslims, the girls have caught up with the boys. The education levels are lower than Hindu, but they are catching again. They are improving, and the girls, the fertility depends more on the woman. Once a woman is educated, it's very
That's
different.
across communities in India. The
Sorry?
women are actually, I'm saying, you know, that the fertility rate depends more on women because from
Exactly.
what, I've read your articles and other people also that when it comes to, issues related to contraception, it is the men who actually do not behave very responsibly, if I can use that word.
Please do. Women, in India, there are 16.4 million abortions we had in 2015. The data showed, and not everyone reports abortion. So this is a lower estimate. And out of these women, 40% do not tell their husbands before having an abortion. And this is not Hindu-Muslim issue. This is women's issue, women's way of thinking, because women cannot afford physically, emotionally, and in every way to have more children. So abortion, if they go and use the risky abortion is risky. It should never be risky, but abortion is risky because it's 90% of the abortion is in back alleys and with untrained or unprofessionals, should I say.
Right.
So they take the risk. It means they want fewer children. Why will women who don't have access to temporary methods, why will they use abortion as a temporary method? It's because they want fewer children, and they will even hide and go and have an abortion. As I said, 40% is a
Right.
very high percentage. For India, there was an abortion assessment, and we ourselves were very surprised. So you're absolutely right. It depends on women's education and women's ability to be able to even seek abortion without informing their family. So
Right.
therefore, Muslim women in India, in fact, temporary methods, they access even more than the other
Okay.
community. Okay, but India, for 30 years, we didn't introduce a single new method. So this
Right.
government, to say the one positive thing about this government is they've introduced new methods.
Okay.
A lot of our feminist friends and others opposed long-lasting injectables and implants. But
Right.
this government did introduce, of course, we have more science and data available on the side effects and management, but we have introduced new methods which has helped the Muslim community. If you look at Indonesia and Bangladesh,
Mm.
the fertility rates are much lower, and partly because they have many more temporary methods than
Okay.
India, and they spend more money on temporary
Well,
methods.
well,
So actually, if we want Muslim population to decline more, I think every woman has the right to decide. But
yes.
if there are political forces, they should understand they need to provide more contraception and education to Muslim women.
Poonam, we were talking about the census. Now we are sitting in 2025 and the 2021 has not even been started. Do not know whether we will actually see it, and if so, what all would be actually documented and how it would be documented. Now, as somebody who understands demography and population, the absence of the census data, how does it actually, upset or disrupt your, sector, your subject, that entire field? How does it cause an impact on you?
More than our sector and we can still do projections based on international data, or we can do some projections on demographic aspects. But without updated census data, policy decisions which are based on outdated assumptions are misleading, wrong, waste of resources, and you can't target communities. You don't know who are the people, for instance, how much urbanization has taken place, how much migration has taken place. So you can't make your policies and programs without census data. You'll go wrong. We'll have inaccurate electoral representation. Census data affects seat distribution and policy focus. It also, misinformation fills the gap where political groups use old data or cherry pick then data and mislead public perception. So there are much greater opportunities. Then research and academic studies suffer. Social scientists lack, as I said, not only government, but social scientists lack accurate migration data, unemployment, and urbanization trends. These are very important for any society in this fast changing world. Not only India, the world is changing fast, but India is changing. And India's demographics are changing very fast as they are in the world. Actually, demographic data has to play the biggest role today in deciding what programs, what policies we have, leave alone the two big elephants in the room. One is the delimitation exercise, and the second is the much awaited exercise for women reservation in political
in parliament and in other
yes,
legislative
in parliament, as well
bodies.
as at the legislative assembly. So there is going to be, as it is, there is so much chaos in the world, but the lack of census, I believe, is chaotic for the country.
Right. We were talking about policies. Now, what we have seen, India has a history of coercion as far as population control is concerned. It is concerned that something which has to be imposed on people. Even now, you have several state governments which have already either passed laws to control population or in the process of passing. Does this business of giving incentives for having fewer children and disincentive for people who have more children, does it really work?
In neither do incentives work nor do disincentives work, and they're wrong. They actually defy women's reproductive rights and justice. First of all, it is an onslaught on women who already have so many problems, not just reproductive health problems, but lack of education, lack of employment. It plays havoc with the lives of the women when you do incentives and disincentives. And often women don't have control on when they marry, who they marry, how quickly they are expected to prove their fertility. So there is, while aspirational India is there is still the patriarchal traditional India, where women have to practice the patriarchal norms expected of them. So it creates problems for them, serious problems, but also it doesn't work. And I'll give you an example. When 12 states in India, about sometime in early 2000, had brought in laws for panchayats that they cannot have more than two. If they have more than two children, they'll have to step down.
They cannot become members.
Yes, which is what, again, some of the South Indian states, especially Andhra, is talking about. People divorce their wives on paper because men wanted to stay in power or fight elections. People gave up children for adoption. Now, these consequences are disastrous. Sex selection also increases when there is coercion. People want to have fewer girls, want to have boys for sure. So we have adverse sex ratios. There's high male-female sex ratio crisis that happens. So in any way, it is the worst solution, disincentives and incentives, and they don't even work, as I said. third thing I want to say is the only country in India is India, where they have incentives and disincentives. 186 countries signed on the Cairo Declaration in 1994 at the Conference on Population and Development, and India was one of the countries that
Right.
signed. And why did the world come to this agreement that incentives and disincentives are not only don't work, but they are unfair? For example, in India, where we have had incentives for sterilization,
Right.
70% of the women who go for sterilization, 77% actually, have never used a temporary method. It's the first time that they
Right.
go through a family planning method, which is sterilization, because they get incentives, financial incentives, which the families want, right?
Right.
What has the woman been doing in the meantime? Either she's had more children than she wanted or
Yes.
wished, or she's been going through multiple abortions. So
Right.
therefore, it's and our budget, 85% of our measly 0.6% budget on family planning, which is part of the 1.5 health budget, which is again very low. So 6% is very low. Of that, we did an expenditure analysis. 85% of the expenditure is on sterilization. 13.5% is on training. So it leaves barely 4% for temporary methods. And in a country where there's a youth bulge, we have a large young population, they need temporary methods and not sterilization. But people go in for sterilization because not only woman gets an incentive, financial incentive, but the health workers, the ASHA, the A&M, they all get incentives. The doctor, everybody gets, it's like a per piece rate everybody gets who's part of the process. So it's a ridiculous situation which we should do away with. But there is a faith in India, again a misconception, that people need sterilization. Yes, some people need sterilization, but many more need temporary methods.
Yes, in fact, you have quite often also spoken about the fact that it's understood that society has also changed in the last few decades. The thinking has changed also in the last few decades, as there has been greater exposure to technology, and through technology to different forms of entertainment, a different kind of lifestyle. So as a result of which we find that uh, there is a greater talk about different kinds of relationships which have been there. There is a greater instance of pre-marriage relationships, some sexual, some non-sexual. These have become issues, as a result of which there is a change, and policies needs to factor these, which are actually not done. Let's come to this issue of health and education. Possibly these are the two biggest issues which can which have a impact on demography on
Yes.
Indian demography. Can you just say that how they are very intimately connected?
So, as I said earlier, education is very critical. And, a woman who's done class 12 is likely to have less than 3 children,
Okay.
average 2, and their aspiration is close to 2. But women who are not educated are
Okay.
likely to have more than 3 children.
Okay.
That's one.
This is regardless of community, religious community, right?
This is regardless of community, it's regardless of class, and it's regardless of global geographies.
Right.
Anywhere in the world. This is, in fact, that's why we call education the best contraceptive, which works, right?
Very well put.
And as far as health is concerned, see, first we've already covered the issue of child mortality.
That's
If
right.
people's children are going to die, they're going to have more children because of the risk of high mortality. And since we have done better, a lot better, and improved in that area, we have that's one reason health impacts, and
Yes.
the health impact is for your children. And if your health systems are strong and women have access to health care, they are likely to not only access family planning, but they'll deal with the side effects. Every contraceptive sadly has a side effect, and it's focused on women. Like you said, the burden is entirely on women of not only producing children, but contraceptives or family planning, the burden of childcare, everything is on the
Everything.
woman. And like you said, you were being very polite when you said, can I say that men are not so responsible? I'd like to say men have been extremely irresponsible
Yes.
and uninvolved, disengaged in the lives of their partners and often their children and women. And that has to change. In fact, if that changes, life for women will change. Not only demographics, but life for women will change. And the demographic dividend that we, apart from the gender dividend, apart from the demographic dividend, India can get, because if women work more or have better jobs, participate in the economy, only then will India become Viksit Bharat.
Okay.
Without the women, India is not going to become. No country in the world has done well economically without women doing well and participating in the workforce. And therefore, the men's role is very important. In fact, we have a slogan and a program which is called Desh Badlega Jab Mard Badlega. The country will change when the men change. In fact, I'd like to say the world will change when men change, including policymakers and politicians, etc. So therefore, what I want to say is that health, going back to health, women have less access to healthcare. Women don't have the freedom, independence to even seek healthcare, and the women are not expected to be taking care of themselves. They're expected to be taking care of the husband, the children, the in-laws. So therefore, if health systems are good, well functioning, and we reach especially those women in the unreached areas, the most vulnerable women. See, the better off women are doing okay. Women like me are doing very well.
Yes.
In every way, we are equal to men or stronger than men in what we do. But it is the most marginalized. Again, it's related to literacy rates too. The illiterate woman, the poor woman has it's a not 100 whammies. We call it double whammy. For them, there are 100 whammies. So therefore, health is so connected to education, and also education. If you're educated, you have greater freedoms to move out of the house, to go to a health system, to deal with the health system. But we need strong health systems too. And especially in tribal areas, where there are Dalit populations, where there are Muslim populations, and there are district level or cluster level approach that we are talking about within the government, and many of us have been pushing. The action is at the district, the action is at the cluster. So the health and education needs to be improved. And for education, I want to say women don't need just class 8 or 12 education. Women need to higher education. Women need skilling. Women need access to credit.
They require also the ability to be able to engage with different professions. The training is required for them, because otherwise they continue to be dependent on a patriarchal society and the men in the family who are going to be determining the choices which they make. Poonam, that's actually very well said, that health, education, and more importantly, change in the social attitude, change in the way the men think about women. I think these are very key issues, and put very, very well by you, that the country will change for the better only if men change to become more sensitive individuals. I think I would like to conclude with this message, that health, education, change in the social attitude of men. That's, as a man, I can make this appeal to all who have viewed this program and go out and convert their
One
friends
point,
and family.
can I make
Yes,
one point?
yes, please.
Ultimately, long-term stabilization of population and everything else will be based on India's population, which will stabilize due to natural demographic transition, not religious dominance. And it's very important, like you appeal to men, thank you very much, you're doing our work, and I'm going to appeal to politicians to forget about or to understand that religious domination does not have anything to do with where India's population will land.
Well, very well put, and thank you very much, Poonam, once again. It's really been wonderful to converse with you after a fairly long time.